While Cortez and his men were still in Villarica de la Veracruz, another group of indigenous people approached the Spanish encampment, but this tribe appeared to be from a different community. Through his interpreters, Cortez learned that this group referred to themselves as the Totonacas. They were eager to get to know these new arrivals, but more importantly, they had some issues that needed to be resolved with a neighbor that had brought them great misfortune. In June, Cortez left 150 soldiers and 2 horsemen behind in Villarica de la Veracruz and set out with 15 horsemen and 300 foot soldiers for the province of Zempoala, the capital of these Totonacan natives, where he met with their chieftain, whom the Spaniards later described as El Cacique Gordo, the fat chieftain, to reference his husky appearance. When speaking with their leadership, Cortez explained that he was sent by a powerful king to this new land. Upon hearing this, the Totonacan leaders told the Spaniards that they were under the yoke of an oppressive tyrant by the name of Moctezuma, who forcefully took their children away to be sacrificed. Their province had as many as 30 Totonacan towns and fortresses, as well as 25,000 residents, but they were unable to liberate themselves from their Aztec overlords. Cortez promised that in exchange for their submission to the King of Castilla, he would offer them protection. It was a bold offer considering the size of the tribe and the scant resources the Spaniards actually had to offer, but the leadership of Zempoala agreed. This new alliance grew the ranks of the Spanish forces, who were eager to meet Moctezuma and see his capital. While the Spaniards were still in the town, 5 Aztec tax collectors appeared and went directly to the Totonacan leadership demanding tribute and to know why they allowed the foreigners into their capital. As punishment, the Aztecs asked the chieftains to hand over 20 residents to be offered up for sacrifice. Upon hearing this, Cortez called on the Totonacan leadership to arrest the tax collectors and to refuse to pay the taxes. When the tax collectors were imprisoned, the Spanish captain actually met with them, but pretended to have no knowledge as to why they were captured. In an act of trickery, disguised as goodwill, Cortez told the tax collectors that he would request the Totonacas to release them. Cortez did so, and then told the 5 Aztec men to return to the Aztec capital and tell their emperor that he was planning to go in peace to visit him. When the tax collectors arrived in Tenochtitlan, Emperor Moctezuma, who was already aware of the Spaniards' arrival, was preparing his forces to confront Cortez. However, when the tax collectors explained that he had set them free, the emperor decided to return the favor by sending gifts to the Spanish visitors. This cunning act provided the Spaniards with 2 important tactical wins in their campaign. They curried favor with the Aztec emperor and put the Totonacan leadership in a dangerous situation that prevented them from backing out of their alliance with Cortez. By solidifying this relationship with Zempoala, the Spaniards also brought its 30 Totonacan settlements under their dominion. This was the first formal military alliance between the Spaniards and an indigenous community. The Totonacas suggested to the Spaniards that they should also attempt to form an alliance with the Tlaxcalans, the mortal enemies of the Aztecs. Cortez then went back to the town of Villarica de la Veracruz that the Spaniards had recently established. During this period, Cortez learned that there were men in his expedition who were still loyal to Diego Velázquez and were planning to return to Cuba. Cortez was no longer acting in accordance with the orders issued by the colonial governor, so any return to Cuba could have led to his arrest or even execution. In an effort to circumvent Velázquez and his loyalists, he ordered some of his men to sail in one of their ships to Spain with a letter and some gold. His intention was to gain legitimacy for his expedition from the King of Spain. Additionally, he rounded up the conspirators and had 2 of them hanged, and another had his toes chopped off. In a death-defying move, he also ordered his men to sink the remainder of their ships so that no one else could plan an escape. In August, they returned to Zempoala with 400 soldiers, 30 riflemen, 15 cavalrymen, and 40 to 50 men with crossbows, where they stocked up on supplies and recruited 800 Totonacan warriors, including some of their chieftains, to join them on their trek to Tenochtitlan. Many of these new indigenous allies served as porters who carried supplies and artillery for the expedition. While passing through the province on their way westward toward Tlaxcala, they stopped in a few towns that were within the Aztec dominion. Cortez later wrote in a letter to the King of Castilla that he was well received by the locals and provided with lodging. While staying in the village of Sautla, another of Moctezuma's vassal states, Cortez had a conversation about the Aztecs and their capital. Olintecle, described Tenochtitlan as a grandiose metropolis whose houses were built above water, and further stated that its only entry points were accessed through 3 causeways that connected the island to the mainland. The cacique continued to say that Moctezuma was a mighty lord, and from his description of the city, it seemed all but impossible to conquer. When he described reserves of gold, silver, and other treasures within the city, the Spaniards grew more eager to witness it with their own eyes. Indeed, throughout central Mexico and beyond, there was no ruler more powerful than Emperor Moctezuma. After hearing these words, Cortés explained that he himself had been sent at the behest of a ruler that was much more powerful than even Emperor Moctezuma, and that he intended to turn the ruler of Tenochtitlan into a vassal of Castilla. The Spanish king, he continued, had commanded Cortés and his expeditionary forces to compel Emperor Moctezuma to give up robbing local towns, seizing more lands, and sacrificing his vassals. Cortés also asked the cacique to forego the practice of human sacrifice as well. The Spaniards then began to prepare to head to Tlaxcala, where they had planned to stop before continuing on to Tenochtitlan. The Totonacas mentioned to the Spaniards that the province was not far away from where they were. There was a wall made of stones in the distance, and that, the Totonacas stated, was the border separating Sautla from Tlaxcala. When Cortés asked the Sautlan chieftain which direction provided the best route to the Aztec capital, Olintecle suggested that he pass through Cholula rather than Tlaxcala. But the Totonacas warned the Spaniards that the Cholulans were a treacherous people who were allies of the Aztecs. Emperor Moctezuma also kept a military garrison in that city. Instead, the expedition should continue through to Tlaxcala as planned, the Totonaca stated. Cortés trusted his Totonacan companions and ordered his forces to continue on to Tlaxcala, as they suggested. The Spaniards then sent forth 2 indigenous messengers to inform the Tlaxcalans of their plans to visit. However, when they entered Tlaxcalan territory, the Spaniards and their Totonacan allies did not receive the warm welcome they had expected. As they made their way through the area, they ran into their 2 indigenous messengers, who were taken as prisoners by the Tlaxcalans. The messengers had tried to explain to the province's leadership that the Spaniards and Totonacas were hoping to form an alliance, but the Tlaxcalans believed that the Spaniards were working on behalf of Moctezuma. They even rejected rumors circulating among the natives that the Spaniards were divine beings. The Tlaxcalans were a courageous and strong people. Contrary to popular belief, they actually fought against the Spaniards before forming an alliance with them. The Tlaxcalans share part of their ethno-history with the Aztecs, in that both groups, along with 5 other Nahuatl-speaking tribes, are said to have emerged from Chicomostoc, the 7 caves. In the first week of September, the Spaniards and their recently acquired indigenous allies entered Tlaxcalan territory, which was located east of modern-day Mexico City. And for the next few weeks, they fought intense battles against the Tlaxcalans, before finally getting them to surrender. On September 23rd, Cortés and his men entered the Tlaxcalan capital victoriously. Around this time, Aztec ambassadors traveled to Tlaxcala to meet Cortés, and they witnessed the Tlaxcalans in their defeat. Cortés met with Tlaxcalan leaders who explained that they initially believed that the Spaniards had entered on behalf of Emperor Moctezuma. They said their lands were regularly pillaged by the Aztecs, and that they had no gold or jewels to offer since they were reduced to extreme poverty. They were also landlocked and had very few options for obtaining salt and other food products. The Tlaxcalan leadership then began to provide details about the layout of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, including its entry points, aqueduct, population, and its immense amount of wealth. When asked by Cortés how they had avoided being conquered by the Aztecs, they responded that they had a few neighboring allied communities, as well as other informants in towns that were under the Aztecs' control, so they were able to prepare whenever an attack was imminent. And it was in these exchanges that the Spaniards and Tlaxcalans agreed to an alliance. And because of the Totonacas, whom they met on the coast and had guided them to the Tlaxcalans, the Spaniards now had safe passage and positive relations with all native towns from Villarica de la Veracruz all the way to Tlaxcala. The Tlaxcalans also offered 5 daughters of noble lineage. This was done according to Tlaxcalan customs to solidify the alliance. It's very important to note that these relations were key to the success of Cortez in Mexico, and many, or even most, historians would agree that the conquest of Mexico could not have happened without the help of the indigenous people who allied with Cortez. The alliance between the Tlaxcalans and Spaniards lasted for the next 300 years, and together during that period they conquered territories as far away as Central America, South America, the Philippines, and what is today the American Southwest. So this is an amazing book. It's called Relación Secreta de Conquistadores, The Secret Report on Conquistadors. Now, this book was written for King Carlos I back in the 1540s. In those days, if you took part in military services, you were entitled to maybe a land grant or other benefits, a title of nobility, etc. Well, you would have to submit a report on your military service. So your service report, which was typically called a servicios y méritos, would detail all the stuff you did during your military service. And that would include what towns you conquered, where you went to, what you did. Did you fight on horseback? Did you fight on foot? I mean, it really explains everything. Actually, those documents are really good. They even show genealogical work. I'll include that. I'll include a tutorial on that in a separate video. Now, after you submitted your Servicios y Méritos document, they would review it in Spain and determine which type of benefit you should get, even beginning right after the conquest in 1521 all the way up to the 1540s. There were some people submitting fraudulent documents claiming that they had taken part in military service when they actually hadn't. And so this book was written in the 1540s, and it has the names of the actual conquistadors who were considered the genuine conquistadors. Here's a map of Mexico. Now, the families in this book, as you can see, are mostly settled in central Mexico because that's where people were at the time. So you can see people were settled in Puebla, Oaxaca, Michoacan, Veracruz, Mexico City. Other places in Mexico, such as northern Mexico, really didn't have any cities yet. That was considered to be the hinterlands. Much of that area wasn't conquered until, the 1590s, and that's when people started to move up north. Here, I'm going to show you the index of the book. By 1559, about 45,000 Spaniards had traveled to New Spain. But that's all of New Spain, not just Mexico.